Sometimes you stand, you may be in your car at a traffic light, and a beggar might come up to you, and sometimes as they beg, as an incentive for you to be generous, they tell you, if you give me, the gods will bless you. Have you ever heard that? And they probably feel that if we are compassionate or kind to those who are less fortunate, that will turn God's face towards us. And so the incentive to giving is that you will receive a blessing. That's the focus, that's the incentive of all religions in the world, actually. Run after the gods for blessing and do whatever you have to do in order to receive that blessing. So many people will follow the commandments of their religion so that they may obtain certain blessings or certain benefits from the deities that they worship. And this is not a strange phenomenon to us. We are living in a society amongst many different faiths which have this kind of bent. And though you may come from a Christian background, or if you have come from another faith, it's possible that at times our minds are not completely reoriented into the God of the Bible and how and why we follow him. And it's possible that we bring with us this idea that we run after blessings, or we seek certain blessings or benefits from our God. And therefore, in order to receive those blessings, it's necessary that I must do what he says. I want to just share with us that this morning that that's a poor incentive to follow our living God. The Christian way of living is not a religion. It is not a divine formula to receive certain things in our lives by doing things and pleasing God, keeping our eye on blessings or benefits that he could give us, and using that as an incentive, using that as a motivation to follow him. The God of the Bible, the God that we follow, calls us to a life which is far superior to that, a life which is completely free from pursuing blessings. And I want to share with us this morning that we don't follow a God for blessings, but we follow God, and his blessings follow us. But that's not the reason. We don't follow him because we want blessings to follow us. And I'm repeating this over and over because we really need to reorient our minds so that we follow God and do the right things and keep the commandments for the right reason, because we love him and we want to honor him with our lives. And then we will see his blessings following us. And this morning, as we read his word, I want to share with you 5 ways in which we can honor God and let the blessings follow. Why don't you stand with me as we open our Bible and read his word to Proverbs chapter 3. And we're going to read from verse 1 to 10. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. You may be seated. There are 10 verses, and we are going to take them in chunks of 2 verses each as we look at 5 ways in which we can honor God with our lives. These are simple ways, but I pray that God will speak to our hearts this morning and help us to reorder our lives according to his priorities and his ways. This chapter is titled Guidance for the Young, because it could be, that these things are especially relevant to those who are, starting out their lives and who are just beginning to understand what it means to walk in the ways of God. Now, this earthly life is full of a lot of unpleasant things. At times, sickness, pain, failed relationships, all kinds of, struggles and challenges that are common to everybody in this life. And it's because of those challenges that we face, it's because of the struggles and the problems that we have, that we often come to God and seek blessings, because we need Him to heal us, or we need Him to deliver us, or we need Him to supply our need, or we need God to manifest one of His attributes in one of the challenging areas of our lives. And we have that privilege as God's children. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, God does not want us to be so focused on pursuing those blessings that we fail to seek Him above all else. And so let's look at verse 1, which encourages us, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you." The first way in which we honor God with our life is by living a life of obedience. To live a life of obedience, you must know what the commands are. Very often when I'm talking to my children, they don't have ears, it seems, because they can't hear anything that I'm saying. If somebody else speaks, they can hear. But if there are conversations that they're not supposed to hear, they can hear that too. But if I am issuing a command or some instructions, very often they cannot hear. So because they cannot hear, they do not carry it out. And when I question them as to why they have not carried it out, the answer is, "I didn't hear you say that," or "You never said that." And I'm sure any parent here can attest to that strange phenomena which happens daily in our homes. But with God, we don't have this excuse of, "I didn't hear, I didn't know," because His Word is our guide. His Word tells us about His commandments. His Word tells us how we are to order our lives and how we are to live our lives every step of the way, every juncture which we are at where we don't know what the right thing to do is. It's in God's Word that we will find the answer. And I just want to encourage you not to get fooled by teachings that you don't need to follow the commandment of God anymore, and you're just living under grace, so just flow in the grace and forget about the commandments. From beginning to end, Jesus has told us how we are to live our lives, what kind of things please Him, what kind of things do not please Him, which kind of things grieve His heart, what kind of things cause Him to turn His face away from us. So the commandments of God are there from beginning to end as our guidebook for our lives, and God is looking at us and demanding lovingly obedience from each one of us. Just as parents expect obedience from children, but parents are still flawed at times in their thinking, God, the perfect parent, requires obedience in all areas of our lives. In all areas. If you look at this passage I read, the word "all" is used several times because, when God comes into our lives, He wants to take over every area of our lives. We cannot stand before God and say, I'm willing to give you 70% or 80%, but these areas I reserve for my private use. God is not satisfied with that. We cannot appease God with a high percentage of control over our life. God is wanting to invade every area of our life, and He's talking to us, maybe especially to young people this morning, when there are, challenges to compromise in certain areas. At times we might, rationalize in our mind and say, well, there are so many other things that my friends are doing and I don't do those. So surely God, surely mom, dad appreciate that, I'm better than all my friends. So let me have this particular area, which dishonors God or which doesn't quite match up to what you had in mind. But God is calling us to a life of complete obedience, which means we must read His Word, which means we must know His commands, which means we must delve into His Word with an earnestness so that we will learn what God requires of us, and then we will approach His commands with obedience, and then we will see the blessing of life and peace following us through all our days. Now, as it is with all these things that I'm sharing with you this morning, there are, areas in which, somebody who was really honoring God and obedient to God may die young. There are times that someone who's very dishonoring to God may live to be over 100 years old. These are general guidelines for our lives and statements of God over how He will, work in our lives. But the truth is that there are certain things that happen in this life which we cannot explain and we cannot understand, and we cannot insist to God that because I'm doing this, you must do that. We don't have the right to come before the King of the universe with that kind of insistence and insist to God that He must do something. God is sovereign and He works in different ways in our lives. But as we honor Him in these areas that I'm sharing with you this morning, I believe we will see in our lives God's blessings following us. And at the same time, it's possible that if we choose to deliberately dishonor God in certain ways, that we will have, adverse consequences which follow us instead of the blessing. And as I was reading this particularly, I was thinking of how God told the children of Israel to honor their father and mother, that their days would be long. Exodus 20, it says in verse 12, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. And this is repeated also in Scripture. And I cannot stress the importance enough of honoring your parents in this lifetime, and seeing how God, blesses you with life and peace. We cannot, make judgments about anyone else, but we can look inward and make judgments about our own lives. That is, as I keep reminding you every time, that is the purpose of the Word of God, to use it as a mirror. So look at your own life, young people especially, and determine to honor God. This will mean different things in different situations, but if we have the right perspective of God, I'm going to obey you no matter what the cost. God will speak to you and God will minister to you in your areas of difficulty or in your areas of struggle. And I think if you talk to anybody who has, disobeyed their parents in major areas of your life, you will always see that there is some regret that follows. And so to young people especially, while your parents are still living on this earth, it's obeying God when you choose to honor them. It's obeying God when you choose to give them that rightful place which God has placed them over you in your life. And the blessing of God is that, you will have peace and life. But those moments when you decide that you are going to dishonor them and you make certain decisions that, dishonor them, more often than not, you're going to see, you may get what you want, but sometimes you're going to find strife pursuing you rather than the blessing of God. Verse 3 says, let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Honor God by living a life of mercy and truth. Mercy here is giving an idea not just of compassion, but it's more kindness. Living a life where you are a kind person and you are a truthful person. And it says that you should bind them around your neck, which is an outward thing, and write them on the tablet of your heart. It's an inward thing, so it's outward and inward both. And that gives us an idea that God is not just asking us to be merciful or kind on the outside or to be truthful on the face of it, but to let that kindness, that mercy and compassion, and also truth to come from the very inside of our lives. So we are living a life of mercy and truth on the inside, and then it obviously comes out in our actions and in the way we interact with one another. And I can't think of any other place where, mercy and truth is challenged more than in a office environment. Sometimes to get ahead or to do what you think you have to do, you will have these moments where you think that ruthlessness is better than kindness. Doesn't matter what kind of an office you work in. Many times you will be faced with this dilemma, and you may not think of it as ruthlessness, but if you stop for a moment and consider the heart of God, you will realize that you're bending towards ruthlessness rather than kindness. There will be times when your inner integrity is challenged, and you will, think of ways in which you can, cover up something or not reveal something. And that's actually lying, concealing, that's deceit. And that means that there is no truthfulness on the inside of you. This just doesn't happen in, the big offices, but this can happen in your home where we are challenged with kindness and truthfulness. This can happen in church or in our cell group when we are interacting with one another, even in the family of God. As you know, we are not all angels, yeah? We are not all angels, and many times we might do things that hurt one another. Sometimes they may be unintentional, but there may be times that we, displease God by intentionally doing things to people, even in the body of Christ, that does not display kindness and truth in our lives. But God is calling us to examine ourselves this morning. And He is encouraging us that one of the important ways in which we honor Him is by letting kindness and truth not just be in our outward acts, but come from the inside of our heart. And it says that you will find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Isn't it ironic that at times we tell a lie, or we cover up something, or we are ruthless because we want to get ahead, we want to be thought of as something, we want to have high esteem in the sight of men. And if we were to be kind, or if we were to tell the truth, it would actually lower their opinions of us. But here God is just cutting across the norms of society, and he's telling us that He has a better way, a higher way. And God's way is that when we, honor Him in the area of mercy and kindness, when we honor Him by being truthful men and women, people of integrity, even in the tiniest areas of our lives that only God sees, that He will give us favor, that He will give us high esteem in the sight of God and in the sight of man. And we don't need to pursue that. Many times we do many things so that people will think highly of us. We don't want to admit it, obviously, in our society. We don't want to ever say that we are doing something because we want people to think something good about us. But if we were to examine ourselves, we will see that there's a lot of, falseness sometimes in even the good things that we do, because we are trying to be highly esteemed by other people, or we are trying to get ahead by finding favor. But God is just breaking that this morning, and He's asking us to be kind and truthful men and women of integrity, and the blessing of high esteem, the blessing of, what other people think of you, and finding favor. That is God's job. That's God's job. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Having an undivided heart of trust before the Lord and leaning not on our own understanding or leaning not on our own knowledge or our own wisdom of what we know, acknowledging the Lord in all our ways. And what happens? God's guidance follows us. God's guidance propels us. It's almost come to be that in Christian circles, the phrase trust in the Lord means trust in God to do what you are telling him to do. Sometimes when people are praying for healing, when they say, I trust in the Lord, what they mean is, I trust that God will heal so and so. When they are praying for a certain situation, we say, I trust in God, but what we really mean is, I trust that God will work this out the way that I am telling him to, or the way that I think that he should do it. But you see, when we trust in God in that way, it is a trust that causes us to think of our own knowledge and our own understanding and to decide what God has to do based on what we think is best, not what God thinks is best. And we think that unless we trust that God will do it and unless he does it, then there's something, lacking in our faith. But what the Bible is encouraging us to do is to trust in the Lord because there is nothing that he cannot do. There is no sickness that he cannot heal. There is no situation that he cannot put right by the flick of his finger. There is nothing that is impossible for our God. But in this life, God is not going to do all those things that we demand and all those things that we may expect of him. But we trust him because we can trust him with our life. We can trust him with our circumstances. We can trust him even with the unsolved situations. We can trust him with those unhealed illnesses because we can trust him that if he doesn't heal, though he is able to, but if he doesn't choose to do it, we can trust him to carry us through. Can't we? We can trust him to take us through. And that is where you see, great is thy faithfulness. It's not just faith that, he can do it and he will do it. It's a higher level of faith. It's a higher level of trust where you say, God, I know you can do it, and I so wish that you would do it, and I ask you that you would do it, but even if you choose not to do it, I will still love you, I will still serve you, I will still honor you, and I will still say that you are good. That's the kind of trust that the Lord is asking us to elevate ourselves to, so that even when we think, according to my own understanding, I can't survive another day unless God brings a breakthrough in this situation, you see that the day goes by and that breakthrough doesn't come, but you're still standing because he's holding your hand. And I can't tell you of the many situations there have been with even people in our congregation who sometimes call and say, I have this situation, and unless God does something by the end of this day today, either I'm going to be on the road, or this is going to happen to me, or that is going to happen to me. And so we believe and we pray and we storm heaven, and the next day that doesn't happen, but they're still standing. They're not on the road because the Lord is with them. But many times in those moments, instead of just understanding the magnitude of what God has really done, we just carry on and think, oh well. But that's the moment to just reflect on God's goodness, reflect on his faithfulness, and have a heart of gratitude and thanksgiving to the Lord. It says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. And this says that, in all our ways, in everything we do, in all the ways about me, acknowledge him. That means recognize him. Carry his presence wherever I am and whatever I'm doing. And let me give you a mental picture of what this might mean, especially if you're a young person. While you're inside the house, you have to behave in a certain way. You have to keep your mouth under control. You have so many things that, you cannot do because your parents and their rules are there in that environment. And then you might go out of the house and you might go to another place, and you are now a different person because, they're not there. They can't see you. They don't really have eyes at the back of their head like they told you when you were young. And so in that environment, you don't recognize them, you don't acknowledge them, you are a different person or you are living your life in a different way. And sometimes, we've all done that when we were young. We carry that into our Christian life where we say in certain places, God's not there. He didn't come with me through the door. He's staying outside while I go inside and I do my thing. But God wants us to acknowledge Him, to recognize Him in all our ways. And in all the things we do, both great and small, if we have an understanding that God is with me, not just for comfort or for presence, but if you have an understanding of God is with me, would He approve of what I'm reading? Would He approve of what I'm looking at on my phone right now? Would He be pleased with, the thoughts that are running through my head? Would He be pleased with how I'm behaving with my body at this very moment? When we live our lives in that kind of a way, we are honoring God by submitting every area of our lives to Him. We're not holding back control on anything. And then He will direct our path. He will guide us. Verse 7 and 8 says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones." Here it's talking about pleasing the Lord in the area of humility. Not having an arrogant spirit. Not thinking that we know better than everyone else, but humbly submitting ourselves before others and before the Lord, fearing Him so that we keep evil out of our lives. And He will give us good health, and He will give strength, and He will give refreshing to our lives and our physical bodies even, as we honor the Lord in this area, in the area of humility and being, submitting to God and submitting to those who He has placed over us. Sometimes we may not know what things we are to do in our lives, and we might receive guidance for it. But at times we might despise the guidance. As young people, sometimes we despise words of wisdom and words of guidance. We despise them. We don't want to hear it because we think we know better. And we miss out on things that God has really destined to do in our lives. As a young kid, all three of us were marched to piano lessons by my mother. I think it was one of the things she did most faithfully in her life. Rain or shine, we were taken to piano lessons. And we would hate it. We would grumble, we would walk slowly on the road so we get late, and all these kinds of things. And cut the lesson if we could, whatever we could, feign sickness, whatever we could to avoid, we would do it. But she was adamant. And I particularly remember telling her, I'm never going to use this. I hate piano. I'm never going to play. I'm never going to, use it. You're just wasting your money. You're just dragging me. I don't ever want to play this instrument ever. Well, we know where that ended up, right? So a couple of days ago, I have this same conversation with my kids. It's just repeating back to me. We hate piano. We are never going to, we're never going to use it. You're just making us do it because you like it. And so that's a weekly argument that we have. And so I told them, and so my elder daughter said, what good has come out of your life because you play the piano? Because I tell her, where would I be if I didn't know how to play the piano? And she's like, okay, where? What? So the real thing for me is that, which I couldn't explain to her because I wasn't sure if she'd understand, is that I don't think I'd even be in ministry serving the Lord if I didn't know how to play the piano, because honestly, from Beethoven, it crossed over to the songs of the Lord, and it's in worshiping the Lord by playing my instrument that actually developed a heart for God, and that's where I, really decided to honor God with my whole life. But I had a better example, which was more real to home for her. So I said, well, actually, if I didn't know how to play the piano, I would have never met your father, because, and here's a good story, the way I met him was I was asked to play the piano for him to sing at a wedding. So I said, so if I didn't know how to play the piano, I would have never been asked to play. And how does that affect you? You wouldn't exist if that didn't happen. So, why am I telling you this story? Because even as parents, God can direct your steps and God can direct your paths to invest in your children's life in certain things which you may not understand where it's going to lead them. But as you honor God, as you seek Him in how to even be a parent, God will direct you, and you won't understand. You won't understand where this is, taking you as a family and taking your children. But it's just how God, who knows from beginning to end, Alpha and Omega, as we sang this morning, directs our paths and directs even the little things in our lives and in our homes. That's how He guides us. It's not, you have a dream and you see a roadway and God is telling you, go down that road. Maybe that happens to some people. But for most of us, it's the little things where God is guiding you as you honor Him. As you honor Him and as you submit all your ways to Him, as you submit every area of your life, even your parenting, you submit it to the Lord. And this morning, I'm not, saying take your kids to every single class you can so that, one day they will meet a person through that vocation. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, we have to be sensitive to the voice of God. We have to submit all the areas of our life to Him. And as we do that, we believe that He will direct us, that He will lead us, that He will, send us on His path beyond our understanding, beyond what we can comprehend. But, in all our ways, acknowledge Him. In everything you do, trust Him. Verse 9 and 10 finally. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase, so that your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. Here it says two things. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of your increase. First fruits of your increase means honoring the Lord, giving Him the 10% of everything that you have, everything that you receive, and over and above that, an offering. The 10% that you're giving is not just giving, it is returning back to God what already belongs to Him. So I was explaining to some kids recently, what is a tithe? A tithe is you borrowed a book from somebody and now you return it back. If you want to call it offering, what does that mean? It means you are wrapping it up and giving it to them as a birthday present. Can you do that? No, because it already belongs to them. So the tithe is what already belongs to God. What we offer Him is over and above that. So if you have a heart of gratefulness, if you have a heart of cheerfulness, if you have a heart of gratitude before God, you give your tithes because you return back to God what is due Him, but you give over and above that an unspecified amount for His kingdom's cause because you love God, you honor Him, and you want to be thankful to Him for what He has done in your life. So that is what it means by with the first fruits of all your increase. Honor the Lord with your possessions. What does that mean? That means give honor to God in the way you deal with all your possessions in your life. Be a good steward. Now, when you return to God 10%, you have 90% back. Say you decide to give another 10%, that leaves you with 80%. What do you do with that 80%? Spend it whichever way you want? No. Honor the Lord with your possessions. Honor the Lord with that percentage that you keep back. Live your life in a way that you are a good steward of the resources that God has given to you. Live your life in a way that, God is pleased with how you are using what He has given to you. And this is, it can be, different ways for different people. And this is not an area where you boast about it or you give to something and then you take a picture of that and you show it to everybody. That's not, what we're trying to do here. We want to honor God. So even if nobody sees, even if everyone thinks you're a stingy fellow, if you are giving and God sees that you're giving, that's good enough. Okay? You honor the Lord with how you use the wealth, how you use the resources that He has given you. So a good way to wrap your mind around this is to realize that even when you have that 80%, it's highly possible that God didn't give you that 80% so that you can spend it on yourself. But God probably gave you that 80% because there is a significant portion of it which He's just going to use you as a vessel, right? He's going to use you as a vessel, and it's going to come through you and go to different people or to different causes and meet the needs of others. So you honor the Lord when you are sensitive to His voice, when you are willing to say, okay, God, I'm not going to hold on to this too tightly. I'll leave it here on the table while you tell me what to do with it. So the final way of honoring the Lord according to this passage is we honor Him with our giving. And it says that our barns will be filled with plenty and our vats will overflow with new wine. Don't take the new wine thing too seriously and think that, God's going to give me bottles of wine. It's talking about a generous sense of God's blessing being poured out in our lives, where we will have enough so that we can be content with what God has given us. The word plenty is going to be different for each person, For me, what is plenty to me may not be sufficient for somebody else. They may think that that is grossly inadequate. But God's way of distributing wealth is different. It depends on who we are, what we do. It depends on what God has planned to do through you. Sometimes God may bless one person inordinately more than He blesses others, and He intends to use that person to bless another 10, 20 more people. So, it's a subjective thing. Plenty is going to be different for many people, but we have to trust the Lord in this area. That's what I want to encourage us. We have to trust the Lord that when we give to Him and when we honor Him, we have to trust Him that He will sustain us and that He will take care of every other area of our lives according to what He sees best, not according to what we decide we need in order to live in the way that we want. Have we ever considered that God may not want us to live in that way? God may not want us to live according to that standard. And that may be uncomfortable to hear, and that may be disheartening to listen to, but that's the truth of the Bible. Many of those who followed God were not living in mansions, but I'm pretty sure they'll have a mansion in glory. But they weren't living in mansions here. And that doesn't mean that anyone who lives in a mansion is disobeying God and is not walking in the ways of God. No, God has different, ways of working in each of our lives. But how we can choose to live is like, God, I will honor you with what I have, and I will trust you with the needs that I have in my life. And I will be satisfied and I will be content with what you choose to bless me with in this life, realizing it's just this life. If I look back on my childhood, I've learned many lessons from my parents, but I think the most significant lesson for me, which I've carried through my whole life, is freedom from fear about God's provision. And I want to share that because I think my parents could have done many things with their lives, but they chose not to think about making a big career, but to trust God and give their lives to His service. And I'm sharing this honestly because maybe there are people here who are struggling with living up to their full potential in serving the Lord because your eyes are on other things and your minds are on the blessing and how can I live without certain things or how can I trust God. I'm pretty much proof that you can trust God. We never grew up worrying about where things would come from or how our needs would be supplied. As a family, we abandoned ourselves to God, and we learned as little kids that even though we lacked for certain things, it didn't make a significant difference to our lives. And we look back at those times of need, those times of lack, and I thank God for them because it has taught me that I can live with much and I can live with little. And as God's people, we cannot decide, God, this is what I need, so I will pursue that. And just please bless me so that I can have that, because I can't live without those things. That's not the Christian life. That is a pagan life. That's a pagan worldview. And God must deliver us from that this morning, honestly. And so in pursuing those things which you think that you cannot live without, and in pursuing those things which you think God is incapable of providing unless you somehow make it happen, you miss out on what God really wants to do with your life on this little time on earth that you have. Because you're so busy pursuing those things, which you don't really need, but you think you need. But when we honor God with giving, when we see our resources as something that we don't hang on to, but also as something that God gives us so that we can be who, He wants us to be. As we give, we get free from that attachment to things and money and prosperity and all that, all that stuff that we think we need to have a good life on this earth. And then we miss out on what God really wants to do. But I want to tell you, if you're generous with your giving, if you honor the Lord with how you use the money you have, if you trust Him with your whole heart and don't lean on your own understanding, it'll come behind you. Not that you're going to be driving a Mercedes-Benz or anything like that. Okay, you may or you may not. But you will see God's plans and His purposes following you and directing you. And you will have the pleasure and the blessing of looking back on your life and seeing, I honored God and He honored me. And I did what I was put on this earth to do.